AI is all over the news at the moment, so I'm going to use ChatGPT to discover what it thinks are the best and worst things about a city that I've been to. And today, it's Sydney. Now, I do stress I haven't explored every part of Sydney, so it's only going on my knowledge of what I know. It's not there to offend anyone that is from Sydney, but just take it with a pinch of salt. Now, let's start with the best things about Sydney. And number one, beautiful beaches. Sydney is famous for its stunning beaches such as Bondi, Coogee and Manly. Now, out of those beaches, I've only been to Manly and it really did blow me away. The golden sands, the little alcoves, it was just gorgeous, and a gorgeous beach. And I can understand why it thinks Sydney beaches are one of the best things about it. I think because of the cauliflower effect almost that Sydney is, the look of it, it allows for a more of a surface area of beaches, and it certainly is known for incredible beaches. I think only other than Brisbane maybe, but I haven't been to Brisbane yet. That will be this year coming. I think Sydney is one of the biggest places for beaches that people know of from Australia. So 100% Sydney has beautiful beaches. Number two, this can't be denied either. Iconic buildings and landmarks. Sydney is home to Australia's most iconic landmarks such as the Sydney Opera House and Sydney Harbour Bridge. Yeah, people come from around the world to see those things, especially the Opera House. It's the picture postcard of Australia. The sort of things you see on postcards for Australia: Uluru, kangaroos, the Sydney Opera House. And so you cannot deny that it has got one of the most iconic landmarks in Australia and possibly one of the most significant, iconic in the world. So once again, I think OpenAI has got it spot on, for sure. Number three, cultural diversity. Now, this is something that was said in the Melbourne best and worst as one of the best. And I think Melbourne probably has a wider scale of diversity for sure. But here it is. Sydney is a multicultural city with a diverse range of people, cultures and cuisines. I'm not going to deny it. They've got, once again, lots of the Asian ethnicities for sure. They've obviously got plenty of Brits and white people, but I don't think it's as culturally diverse as, say, Melbourne, because I think Melbourne really hits hard on that, which is awesome. I've got no problem with that. I know some people get a little bit upset when they get a bit more cultural diversity because it's losing its Australianness, if that's a real word. But yeah, I can't disagree. But it's not something I've necessarily experienced other than Chinatown, which is an awesome place. Oh, those puff pastries. Not puff pastries, what were they? The cream puffs. Oh, amazing they were. Anyway, going off topic. Cultural diversity, though, I'm sure it does have that. Number four on the best is a vibrant nightlife. Sydney has a buzzing nightlife scene with numerous bars, clubs, and live music venues. Now, myself and Charlie, we're not really nightlife clubbing type people, at least me not anymore, not for about 10 years now. I prefer to snuggle up on the sofa watching a film. I'm only 33, that sounds ridiculous. Anyway, however, I would say we had amazing people showing us around, and one of the amazing people, Marty, he took us for a drive. And we seemed to explore quite a lot of Sydney at night time after the prelim final, Swans versus Collingwood, and he took us around, and we really could see parts of that nightlife, which I didn't necessarily see in Melbourne, and I didn't necessarily see in Adelaide either. So I certainly think that nightlife-wise, definitely, you could see in the different sections of where we visited in Sydney that there was different styles of nightlife. There was the more sophisticated bars and restaurants, but then there were the clubs as well. Now, you could say that's probably the same in every location, big city, but it's something that on our visit, we definitely saw, not necessarily experienced, but we saw. Number 5 on the best things, world-class events. Sydney hosts numerous world-class events throughout the year, including the Sydney New Year's Eve fireworks, Vivid Sydney, and the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras. That was recently, wasn't it? The Mardi Gras, I think, was really recently because they did some live shows and stuff. I think Kylie was in it. But yeah, it does do, when you think of fireworks at the moment, it's, London, then, Sydney. I'm trying to think of the other ones now. Paris, New York. But Sydney is one of those for fireworks, for example. And you do have these big cultural events for sure. That's what I think. I think I would use that word as well. The cultural events, if that makes sense to you. It's the sort of events that is bringing everyone together. And yeah, you can't deny that it has world-class events. On to the negative things. Let's go 5 of the worst things now. Number 1, high cost of living. Sydney is known for a high cost of living with expensive housing, transport, and food. So I'm going to take away the food because once again, like Melbourne and in Australia in general and big cities, prices are always slightly higher anyway. But in general, there's things that are cheaper than the UK, some things that are more expensive, but it's like comparing, I don't know, Australian prices to Indian prices, or, there's clearly going to be a difference. So I don't think it's fair to single out a city like Sydney or like before with Melbourne. Some are high, some are low. Let's round it off. Transport. Now, I would possibly only say the transport because I think transport in Sydney is harder than places like Melbourne and Adelaide because, like I said about the cauliflower shape, you've got to get across water, for example, and it's a little bit trickier. I don't think the trams are as good in Sydney. Not saying they're awful, but they're not quite as good as Melbourne. Sorry, Melbourne's trams are brilliant. And then you look at housing. Housing, I think apparently houses are more expensive than Melbourne. And Melbourne are expensive houses, so Sydney is even more expensive. But once again, it depends how close to the centre you live. But once again, it's like comparing it to London. Well, London prices, everyone knows London prices are extortionate. So if you don't want to pay those prices, don't live in London. And so I'm sure that's absolutely spot on. High prices for housing and less decent transport, definitely a negative. Number 2. Traffic congestion. Sydney's roads can become very congested during peak hours, making driving and commuting a challenge. Now, for us, I didn't experience massive congestion and traffic because we didn't actually drive ourselves in Sydney. When we did get lifts, for example, it was at night time, wasn't any traffic. There was a little bit of traffic on the way back from the Blue Mountains, but nothing too major by the time we got back. So I've got no experience of this. However, I have had comments previously, it can take an hour and a half to get from one side of Sydney to the other. And that seems a long time. An hour and a half, if you were in London, you could definitely get to where I am in Eastleigh in an hour, even with a bit of traffic. So I 100% think that is probably true. Number 3 for the worst things are limited public transport options. While Sydney has a decent public transport network, it can be limited in some areas and services can be unreliable at times. Now, once again, I think it's that cauliflower shape of Australia where it has to, you have to go over rivers, you have to have bridges. It's not easy to go underground because you have to go build tunnels underwater. So I can understand why the public transport is not as good as, say, somewhere like Melbourne, where pretty much the transport in Melbourne is brilliant. It's really, really good. In Sydney, we didn't necessarily have a problem getting around the main CBD area. So that was fine. But I can appreciate, getting to Manly, for example, is a bit of a pain. We got the ferry over, which was actually really good, apart from I'm not good with a few waves. Charlie was fine, I was gripping onto the seat. And but it's still a pain that you have to get a ferry to get over to Manly, and the road and whatnot isn't that practical. So definitely, public transport, not quite as good as other places in Australia. Number 4 on the worst things, crowds and busy streets. Sydney can be a very crowded and busy city, particularly in tourist areas and during events. Well, clearly it's going to be busy during events. That seems to be a stupid thing. It's busy anywhere where there are big events going on. So let's scrap that last little bit. Sydney can be very busy. Now, the only period where there was 2 periods we found that were really busy. The first one was the market in Chinatown, because we were literally staying behind Chinatown, and it was ridiculously busy, but it was such an awesome time with all the markets, eating the meat on sticks. It was so fun. And so I know it was busy, but it isn't like a narrow streets. The only other time was obviously the prelim final after the game, people getting out. But what do you expect after a match with thousands of people in a stadium? I don't think that's fair to be moaning and grumbling about that. So I didn't necessarily experience myself any real crowding, because for me, Sydney seems to be a little bit more spread out, a little bit open. The roads are normal to me because they are, you know, you have roundabouts, you have bends in the roads and things, whereas somewhere like Melbourne, it's straight lines in the CBD, that is. So actually I thought that Sydney was easier to have more people because everything just feels a bit more spread out. But that's, you know, just from the experience that I've had while I was there, but I didn't experience anything massively busy during normal times. And the last one for the worst, number 5, harsh weather conditions. Sydney can experience extreme weather conditions, including heat waves, bushfires and storms, which can impact daily life and travel plans. So I know Melbourne has the 4 seasons in a day, but actually I think we experience worse weather. Well, no, not necessarily worse, but more variable weather in Sydney. We had a day which absolutely chucked it down. I think it was a Friday. It chucked it down all afternoon and into the evening. And then on the Saturday, we did a meet and greet, and in the afternoon it was the prelim final. And I know it was only about 25 degrees, but my big forehead got proper burnt. So going from that cold, absolute chucking it down, to then for the time of year, early spring, to having 25 odd degrees, that's a big swing. And to say then there are other things like the heat waves, the bushfires, the storms, etc. This is what I talked about with Australia in general, is you have a lot more, even in the same locations, you have a lot more extreme weather. Over in the UK, we have fairly consistent. You roughly know what it's going to be. Most of the time it's nothing great, but at least it's not the extremes. So I will agree, and actually people have told me that there's a fact that Sydney actually gets more rainfall than Melbourne. If that's true, cool. If not, someone's told me lies. But there we go. There are the 5 best and 5 worst things about Sydney, and what I have taken from my experience when I was in Sydney, which isn't a whole picture, just what I witnessed. Hopefully you agree. If you don't, feel free to let me know. I know you normally do. Thank you so much for watching once again. Hopefully you're enjoying this ChatGPT OpenAI series. Make sure you like and subscribe. Go to charlieandrob.com to see our vlogs, and check out the Australia playlist from our vlogs of our time down under. I'll catch you next time.